All right. Well, without further ado, we are reading The Way of the Pilgrim, but we are actually starting, I think, this tonight. The Pilgrim Continues His Way, which is technically a second book, but in this sense, the second half of this book. So it starts out here as a chapter 5. And so the starets, the teacher, the guru. A year had gone by since I last saw the pilgrim, when at length a gentle knock on the door and a pleading voice announced the arrival of that devout brother to the hearty welcome which awaited him. Come in, dear brother. Let us thank God together for blessing your journey and bringing you back. What a great way to be welcomed back. Let me see here. All right. Hannah's here. Hello, Hannah.
Hello, how are you?
Excellent. Excellent. All right. The Pilgrim. Praise and thanks be to the Father on high for his bounty in all things, which he orders as seems good to him, and always for the good of us pilgrims and strangers in a strange land. Here am I, a sinner, who left you last year, again by the mercy of God, thought worthy to see and hear your joyful welcome. And of course, you are waiting to hear from me a full account of the holy city of God, Jerusalem, for which my soul was longing, and toward which my purpose was firmly set. But what we wish is not always carried out, and so it was in my case. And no wonder, for why should I, a wretched sinner, be thought fit to tread that holy ground on which the divine footsteps of our Lord Jesus Christ were printed? You remember, Father, that I left here last year with a deaf old man as a companion, and that I had a letter from a merchant of Irkutsk to his son at Odessa, asking him to send me to Jerusalem. Well, we got to Odessa all right in no very long time. My companion at once booked a passage on a ship for Constantinople and set off. I, for my part, set about finding the merchant's son by the address on the letter. I soon found his house, but there, to my surprise and sorrow, I learned that my benefactor was no longer alive. He had been dead and buried 3 weeks before after a short illness. This made me very much cast down, but still I trusted in the power of God. The whole household was in mourning, and the widow, who was left with 3 small children, was in such distress that she wept all the time, and several times a day would collapse in grief. Her sorrow was so great that it seemed as though she too would not live long. All the same, in the midst of all of this, she met me kindly, though in such a state of affairs she could not send me to Jerusalem. But she asked me to stay with her for a fortnight or so until her father-in-law came to Odessa, as he had promised, to settle the affairs of the bereaved family. So I stayed. A week passed, a month, and then another. But instead of coming, the merchant wrote to say that his own affairs would not allow him to come, and advising that she should pay off the assistance and that all should go to him at Irkutsk at once. So a great bustle and fuss began, and as I saw they were no longer interested in me, I thanked them for their hospitality and said goodbye. Once more I set off wandering about Russia. I thought and thought, where was I to go now? In the end, I decided that first of all I would go to Kiev, where I had not been for many years. So I set off. Of course, I fretted at first because I had not been able to carry out my wish to go to Jerusalem. But I reflected that even this had not happened without the providence of God, and I quieted myself with the hopes that God, the lover of men, would take the will for the deed, and would not let my wretched journey be without edification and spiritual value. And so it turned out, for I came across the sort of people who showed me many things that I did not know, and for my salvation brought light to my dark soul. If that necessity had not sent me on this journey, I should not have met those spiritual benefactors of mine. this is that this is that just the way to live life. It's the accepting what the moment brings as being the divine will, and that confidence because you're in that divine company all the time, that what is happening is sacred. What is happening and what is going on around you is to be accepted and appreciated as from the beloved. And you then turn it into gold. That's the one of the things about, I think, the magic of spiritual life, of what it can do to you as far as your mental health. And just as a side note, but to be able to maintain that positivity, to be able to maintain that faith. St. Paul says, I think it's in Romans, all things work together for good to those that love God and are called according to his purpose. And so this notion that everything happening to you is for your benefit, to bring you closer to the beloved. And that our task is not just to accept that, but to accept that and learn because of that, to listen closely and to sit patiently in our circumstance, whether they're good or bad, and allow ourselves in the presence of God to be taught and to be, set. I don't know what to say in that way. To have our soul, the tangles of our soul combed out. How's that? To have the tangles of our soul combed out just by the presence of God. But to know that and not to be discouraged when things come differently or turn out differently. It's also that practice of waiting, like the Peace Pilgrim would say, that every moment, she considered every moment an opportunity to serve. And she saw her task or her life as a lover of God. Her job was to remain ready and in the moment, to always make sure that in the moment she was perfectly ready to serve at the first opportunity or the first sign that some service was necessary or needed. And so it's like that as well. And it really brings almost a storybook reality to life, to live like that, to to sit there and just watch with readiness, and to see everything as a potential opportunity being presented by the beloved, by your beloved, and then moving in purpose, which is to serve, to be there in that moment. And so here he is. He's often by himself, hasn't had any money. He's totally existing on alms. So he's really living a wandering sadhu's life. And, just decided, okay, well, it's not for me to go to Jerusalem. That's the divine will. But I believe this is divine providence for me to just go. And he went to Kiev. And because of that, and because of his watchfulness, meeting these wonderful people that were able to teach him, and he was able to learn things that he didn't know, that he was given insight for. And that's the bottom line. To walk like that with God, you are walking in the pages of the scripture, like we've talked about, that the daily experience becomes scripture. The daily life becomes mantra, becomes Veda, and you begin to see the divine. So by day I walked along with the prayer, and in the evening when I halted for the night, I read my Philokalia for the strengthening and stimulating of my soul in its struggle with unseen enemies of salvation. On the road about 45 miles from Odessa, I met with an astonishing thing. There was a long train of wagons loaded with goods. There were about 30 of them, and I overtook them. The foremost driver, being the leader, was walking beside his horse, and the others were walking in a group some way from him. The road led past a pond which had a stream running through it, and in which the broken ice of the spring season was whirling about and piling up on the edges with a horrible noise. All of a sudden, the leading driver, a young man, stopped his horse, and the whole line of carts behind him had to come to a standstill also. The other drivers came running up to him and saw that he had begun to undress. They asked him why was he undressing. He answered that he very much wanted to bathe in the pond. Some of the astonished drivers began to laugh at him, others to scold him, calling him mad, and the eldest there, his own brother, tried to stop him, giving him a push to make him drive on. The other defended himself and had not the least wish to do as he was told. Several of the young drivers started getting water out of the pond in the buckets with which they watered the horses, and for a joke splashed it over the man who wanted to bathe, on his head or from behind, saying, "There you are, we'll give you a bath." As soon as the water touched his body, he cried out, "Ah, that's good," and sat down on the ground. They went on throwing water over him. Thereupon he soon lay down, and then there quietly died. Well, that's an odd ending. They were all in great fright, having no idea why it had happened. The older ones bustled about, saying that the authorities ought to be told, while the rest came to the conclusion that it was his fate to meet this kind of death. I stayed with them about an hour, and then went on my way. About 3.5 miles farther on, I saw a village on a high road, and as I came into it, I met an old priest walking along the street. I thought I would tell him about what I had just seen and find out what he thought about it. The priest took me into his house, and I told him the story and asked him to explain to me the cause of what had taken place. "I can tell you nothing about it, my dear brother, except perhaps this, that there are many wonderful things in nature which our minds cannot understand. This, I think, is so ordered by God in order to show men the rule and providence of God in nature more clearly. Through certain cases of unnatural and direct changes in its laws, it happens that I myself was once a witness to a similar case. Near our village, there is a very deep and steep-sided ravine, not very wide, but some 70 feet or more in depth. It is quite frightening to look down to the gloomy bottom of it. A sort of footbridge had been built over it. A peasant in my parish, a family man and very respectable, suddenly, for no reason, was taken with an irresistible desire to throw himself from this little bridge into that deep ravine. He fought against the idea and resisted the impulse for a whole week. In the end, he could hold himself back no longer. He got up early, rushed off, and jumped into that abyss. They soon heard his groans, and with great difficulty pulled him out of the pit with his legs broken. When he was asked the reason for his fall, he answered that although he was now feeling a great deal of pain, yet he was calm in spirit, that it had carried out the irresistible desire which had worried him so for a whole week, and that he had been ready to risk his life to gratify his wish. He was a whole year in the hospital getting better. I used to go see him and often saw the doctors who were around him. Like you, I wanted to hear from them the cause of the affair. With one voice, the doctors answered that it was frenzy. When I asked them for a scientific explanation of what that was and what caused it to attack a man, I could get nothing more out of them, except that this was one of the secrets of nature which were not revealed to science. I, for my part, observed that if in such a mystery of nature a man were to turn to God in prayer, and also to tell good people about it, then his ungovernable frenzy of theirs would not attain its purpose. So just this reservation that, there's no way to know everything. These are some odd stories, and they'll probably mop that up here in a little bit. But just this notion of not everything can be known, and there are things that we don't know, and that we won't know, and we have to figure out how we're going to deal with those things. I think he here is wanting to put it on faith, to say these things rest in the divine. But for us, in our spiritual walk, when we don't understand things, our means of divining answers from it is certainly number one, like him, go to a teacher, go to your guru, and ask. And second, which he just mentioned here, is prayer, is to sit down in quiet, and lay out your confusion or your question to the divine. And then just sit and wait. And it doesn't have to be one sitting period. You can sit for the time you can sit today. And then tomorrow, if you still haven't gotten an answer within that's satisfying, you sit again, just in quietness. You don't keep repeating the question necessarily. You just sit there until from within the answer is given to you. You know, the answer is delivered. And when will it be? Who knows? But I think in any earnest situation, any soul will eventually get an answer for it. Although I don't I don't doubt that it could take years if it's not instantaneous, depending on what you're asking. Truly, there is much to be met with in human life, of which we can have no clear understanding. While we were talking, it was getting dark, and I stayed the night there. In the morning, the mayor sent his secretary to ask the priest to bury the dead man in the cemetery, and to say that the doctors, after a post-mortem, had found no sign whatever of madness, and gave a sudden stroke as the cause of death. "Look at that now," said the priest to me. "Medical science can give no precise reason for his uncontrollable urge toward the water." And so I said goodbye to the priest and went on my way. After I had traveled for several days and was feeling rather done in, I came to a good-sized commercial town called Bilaya Cherkov. As evening was already coming on, I started to look around for a lodging for the night. In the market, I came across a man who looked as though he was a traveler too. He was making inquiries among the shops for the address of a certain person who lived in that place. When he saw me, he came up to me and said, "You look as though you are a pilgrim too. Let's go together and find a man by the name of Evanorov, who lives in this town. He's a good Christian and keeps a splendid inn and welcomes pilgrims. Look, I've got something written down about him." I gladly agreed, and so we went and found his house. Although the host himself was not at home, his wife, a nice old woman, received us very kindly and gave us an out-of-the-way private little garret in the attic to rest in. We settled down and rested for a while. Then our host came and asked us to have supper with them. During supper, we talked who we were and where we came from, and somehow or other the talk came around to the question of why he was called Evrenov. "I'll tell you an odd thing about it," he said, and began his story. You see, it was like this. My father was a Jew. He was born at Shklov, and he hated Christians. From his very earliest years, he was preparing to be a rabbi and studied hard at all the Jewish chit-chat, which was meant to disprove Christianity. One day, he happened to be going through a Christian cemetery. He saw a human skull, which must have been taken out of some grave that had been recently disturbed. It had both its jaws, and there was some horrible-looking teeth in them. In a fit of temper, he began to jeer at the skull. He spat at it, abused it, and spurned it with his foot. Not content with that, he picked it up and stuck it on a post, as they stick up bones of animals to drive off greedy birds. After amusing himself in this way, he went home. The following night, he had scarcely fallen asleep when suddenly an unknown man appeared to him and violently upbraided him, saying, "How dare you insult what is left of my poor bones? I am a Christian, but as for you, you are the very enemy of Christ." The vision was repeated several times every night, and he got neither sleep nor rest. Then the same sight started flashing before his eyes during the daytime also, and he would hear the echo of that reproachful voice. As time went on, the vision got more frequent, and in the end, he began to feel depressed and frightened and to lose strength. He went to his rabbi, who read prayers and exorcisms over him, but the apparition would not only not cease, it got even more frequent and more threatening. This state of affairs became known, and hearing about it, a business friend of his, a Christian, began to advise him to accept the Christian religion and to urge upon him that apart from that, there was no way of ridding himself from this disturbing apparition of his. But the Jew was loth to take this step. However, in reply, he said, I would gladly do as you wish, if only I could be free from this tormenting and intolerable apparition. The Christian was glad to hear this and persuaded him to send in the local bishop a request for baptism and reception into the Christian church. The request was written, and the Jew, not very eagerly, signed it. And lo and behold, the very minute that the request was signed, the apparition came to an end and never troubled him again. His joy was unbounded, and entirely at rest in mind, he felt such a burning faith in Jesus Christ that he went straightway to the bishop, told him the whole story, and expressed a heartfelt desire to be christened. He eagerly and quickly learned the dogmas of the Christian faith, and after his baptism, he came to live in this town. Here he married my mother, a good Christian woman. He led a devout and very comfortable life, and he was the most generous to the poor. He taught me to be the same, and before his death gave me his instructions about this, together with his blessing. There you are. That is why my name is Evernov. Evernov literally means son of a Jew. So that's where his name came from. So if you see a skull on the road, don't abuse it. I listened to this story with reverence and humility, and I thought to myself, how good and kind of our Lord Jesus Christ is, and how great is his love. In what different ways he draws sinners to himself. With what wisdom he uses of little importance. He uses things of little importance to lead us on to great things. Who could have expected that this mischievous prank by this Jew and some dead bones would bring him to the true knowledge of Jesus Christ and be the means of leading him into a devout life? That part there, that's a very interesting ideal, that there is this providence, that God does take the things that happen to us in life in order to take us forward. That's that whole bit of faith we were talking about, that accepting this moment is perfect, is to accept that ideal, that this moment is a manifestation of your highest ideal of pure love. This moment is a manifestation of your beloved, and that it's perfect, not to the body and mind, but to the soul. And so for us to remain in that awareness and to remain in that perspective, or to at least search diligently for that perspective, that allows us to accept the moment and to see the perfection, to experience the perfection of the moment and to go forward. It's a very difficult teaching, but certainly if any of us think for a while, I'm sure many of us could come up with stories, perhaps not like this one in the same degree, and maybe of a different nature, but certainly you can see those times that God has taught, and those times when you have gotten a very special insight, or have taken a leap forward in your faith for some reason. You can hear it when swamis give their lectures and talk about the events that they've gone through or that they've seen or witnessed, where these things have happened. It's part of my ideal that this life is a dance, and it's a dance with you and the beloved, and that this moment is the beloved, and that your reaction and use of this moment are your moves in your dance with the divine. And so in this togetherness, in this jig, this jig of life, to dance carefully with the beloved, and to hear the rhythm of the song, and to be attentive to the movements of your partner, so that you dance appropriately without stepping on toes and such. So it's about living a life of faith, about letting God be real. There's this notion, that if you can't see God or feel like you haven't seen God, First of all, ask yourself what it is you think you have seen, if everything is the divine. And then the second thing is to do more do more acts of love, do more practices of unselfishness. That if you become a source of love to the people around you, love is going to manifest around you. And that love that manifests is the presence of your beloved. And so if you want to see God, act like God. If you want to know God, see others as God and treat them accordingly. And before long, love will surround you. And the divine presence will become apparent to you. After supper, we thanked God and our host and retired to our garret. We did not want to go to bed yet, so we went on talking to each other. My companion told me that he was a merchant of Mogilev and that he had spent 2 years in Bessarabia as a novice in one of the monasteries there, but only with a passport that expired at a fixed date. He was now on his way home to get the consent of the merchant community to his finally entering upon the monastic life. The monasteries there satisfy me, their constitution and order and the strict life and many devout Startists who live there. He assured me that putting the Bessarabian monasteries beside the Russian was like comparing heaven with earth. He urged me to do the same. While we were talking about these things, they brought still a third lodger into our room. This was a non-commissioned officer with the army for the time being, but now going home on leave. We saw that he was tired out from his journey. We said our prayers together and lay down to sleep. We were up early the next morning and began to get ready for the road, and we only just wanted to go and thank our host, when suddenly we heard the bells ringing for matins. The merchant and I began to consider what we would do. How could we start after hearing the bells without going to church? It would be better to stay to matins, say our prayers in the church, and then we should go off more happily. And so we decided, and we called the officer. But he said, "What's the point of going to church while you are on a journey? What good is it to call on God if we have been? What good is it to God if we have been?" Now, whether they go to church or not, why does God care? Let's get off home and then say our prayers. You two go if you want. I'm not going. By the time you have stood through matins, I shall be 3 or 4 miles or so farther on my way, and I want to get home as quickly as possible. To this, the merchant said, "Look here, brother. Don't you run so far ahead with your schemes until you know what God's plans are." So we went to church, and he took to the road. We stayed through matins and the liturgy too. Then we went back to our garret to get our knapsacks ready for the start. What do we see but our hostess bringing in the samovar? "What are you off to?" she says. "You have a cup of tea?" "Yes, and have dinner with us too. We can't send you away hungry." And so we stayed. We had not been sitting in the samovar for a half an hour when all of a sudden our non-commissioned officer comes running in, all out of breath. I've come to you in both sorrow and joy." "What's all this?" we asked him. And this is what he said. "When I left you and started off, I thought I would look in your pub to get a change for a note and have a drink at the same time so as to get along better. So I did. I got my change, had my drink, and was off like a bird. When I had gone about 2 miles, I had the mind to count the money the fellow at the pub had given me. I sat down by the roadside, took out my pocketbook, and went through it, all serene. Then suddenly it struck me that my passport was not there, only some papers and some money. I was as frightened as if I had lost my head. I saw in a flash what had happened. Of course, I had dropped it when I was setting up at the pub. I must have run back. I ran and I ran. Another awful idea seized me. Suppose it's not there? Well, that will mean trouble. I rushed up to the man behind the bar and asked him. "I've not seen it," he said, and I was downhearted. Well, I searched around and hunted everywhere, wherever I had stood and hung about. And what do you think? I was lucky enough to find my passport. There it was, still folded up and lying on the floor among the straw and litter, all trampled in the dirt. Thank God, I was glad. I can tell you, it was as though a mountain had rolled off my shoulders. Of course, it was filthy and coated with mud enough to give me a clout on the head. Still, that doesn't matter. At any rate, I can get home and back again with its whole skin. I came to tell you about it. And what's more, in my fright, I've rubbed my foot absolutely raw with running and can't possibly walk. So I came to ask for some good grease to bandage it up with. There you are, brother, the merchant began. That's because you wouldn't listen and come with us to church. You wanted to get a long way ahead of us, and on the contrary, here you are right back again, and lame in the bargain. I told you not to run so far ahead with your schemes, and now see how it has turned out. It was a small thing that you did not come to church, but besides that, you used such language as, what good does it do God if we pray? That, brother, was bad. Of course, God does not need our sinful prayers, but still, in his love for us, he likes us to pray. And it is not only that holy prayer, which the Holy Spirit himself helps us to offer and arouses in us, that is pleasing to him, for he asks that of us when he says, abide in me and I in you. But every intention, every impulse, even every thought which is directed to his glory and our own salvation is of value in his sight. For all these, the boundless loving kindness of God gives bountiful rewards. The love of God gives grace 1,000 more than human actions deserve. If you give him the merest mite, he will pay you back with gold. If you but purpose to go to the Father, he will come out to meet you. You say but a word, short and unfeeling, receive me, have mercy on me, and he falls on your neck and kisses you. That is what the love of the Heavenly Father is like toward us, unworthy as we are. There's a beautiful description of that love. Does anybody have any insights or anything that you've seen that you wanted to ask about or talk about?
Swami, hello.
Yes.
I have a observation. I don't know. It didn't strike me that the first story with the rabbi. It didn't strike me as a. It didn't connect with me. Like I don't have a. How should I say this? Why is it that the rabbi couldn't find the peace of God in his own religion? And why did he get haunted? You know, by the apparition. I just struggle with that.
Yeah, no, there's good things in there to struggle with. I remember the first time I read this book, I put it down at that point because I didn't like that notion of him changing his religion in midstream like that. But one thing we have to face, a truth that we have to face, is it's a Christian book, written within the Christian dogmas and ideals, and we're all very well aware that they, from within the realm of Christianity, they believe themselves to be the only true religion, and that the only way that God could be merciful for a Jew is to turn him into a Christian. And so in this story, that's how it happens. But I think for us as Vedantists and kind of having a broader understanding of the movements of God, or a different understanding of the movements of the divine, that for us it's really just a story about God using the events of using your karma, really, using your karma to bring you closer. And so this guy's karma that I'm talking about would be his having such an inbred hatred for Christians that he would abuse a corpse, abuse the skull belonging to a Christian. and that God would take the karma of that action and use it to teach him and to bring him forward, in that action. So really, I think that we have to throw off that idea of there only being one right path, as not being consistent with the teaching of God as a whole, but to then look at the story more of the teaching of how God uses karma. God uses our actions. God is intimately involved in karma, and the point of karma is to bring us closer to the divine. It informs us when we're acting inappropriately. So this guy abuses the corpse and then gets haunted. And he gets haunted, and that causes him to second guess his actions and then to seek advice to try and find out, how do I deal with this? And then in this case, of course, he becomes a Christian, which brings him closer to the divine. So, but as we look at the story through the Vedic ideal, we see that God is basically just bringing him closer to him, based upon his karmas, based upon his actions, and teaches him that this world is meant to lead you to the divine. This world is meant to bring you to realization. And so if you view this world with any honesty, with any integrity, and you have any interest in the divine, that God will use everything to bring you forward and to bring you to bring you closer to your understanding, your nature, to your own realization. Does that help? There's not a lot we can do about the Christian bias. That's just going to be there almost in any Christian text you pick up. And so
it definitely helps. It helps. It's like you say, it's the way that if you believe that Jesus is the only Lord, then you're stuck in that. And it's unfortunate because I know a Jewish person would read this and just confirm their fears and their belief that a large part of the Christian community is anti-Semitic.
Anti-Semitic. I can't speak to that, but I think that they're certainly in a sense anti-other religion, whether it's Semitic or Buddhism or Vedantist or anything. They have that idea about all other religions, and where that comes from. Well, we could all offer probably an idea of where that comes from or where that came from. It starts actually in the Jewish tradition. The Jewish tradition is one of the few that has that notion of being the chosen people. That they've been chosen separate and apart from the whole. And I think that idea just bubbled its way right into Christianity and carried on, which, is an interesting ideal. For myself, I was raised that way, and I felt that way for the large part of my life. And when I became a Vedantist, I went through a little bit of internal struggle about feeling like I was being untrue, and had to struggle with that quite a while. And the way that it resolved for me was sitting in the shrine one day with, there were a couple of things, actually. One of them was sitting in the shrine in San Francisco and just kind of pouring out in prayer that I was struggling with this. I didn't like it because I didn't believe it to be true, and yet I couldn't get rid of it because I was raised with that idea. And I just got the very strong conviction came up inside. He who was Buddha is Jesus. He who was Rama is Jesus. He who was Krishna is Jesus. And I looked at the shrine and just felt very deeply that it is the same. Ramakrishna says that an avatar is a hole through which God can be seen. And it's only because of our egoism that we have latched on to these individual avatars and created discrete individual movements of God out of each one of them, and then pitted them against each other. That is the very definition of egoism. So it's clear that doesn't come from the binding heart of love, or from the unifying force of love, because love binds together. It's ego that breaks apart. And so that was there. The second thing that gave me great confidence in that is that we used to have a devotional singing on Saturday nights at the San Francisco Center. And I still have all kinds of good foot stomping country traditionals that I sang in church growing up. And, I went to Swami Prabhutananda and I said, Maharaj, I said, I know all this great music from growing up. And I said, I could change the words and we could sing them for our devotional singing. And he looked at me in kind of a weird way, which kind of threw me. And I looked at him and he said, why would you change the words? And I was so, I don't know, that just so opened the gate of my heart, that was the second thing that just removed that barrier when I saw how he, as a Swami, a Vedanta Swami, could sing Christian devotional songs with the same mood and love as he sings songs to Ramakrishna or Holy Mother or Shiva or any of the host. And that practice, to me, I knew in my heart. I mean, it opened me up so much inside. I feel and felt and experienced the truth of it. And so that's how I view those things. When I was up at Holy Cross Monastery for that 10 months that I was up there, I was studying with Brother Richard, who was a doctorate from Oxford, who was kind of showing me the early church fathers' writings. And he himself said something very interesting to me. He said, one can't escape the truth that the first 7 meetings of the church were either presided over or called by the emperor. And he said it was at a time when the empire was in decline, and the emperor was looking for a glue to bring it back together again, to sustain it. And he said, unfortunately, and this was from a Christian doctorate himself telling me this, he said, and so he says it's quite clear that some of the political motives of the day made their way into church dogma and doctrine. And he was telling me that one of the reasons that he liked and enjoyed the study of the early church fathers is it helped him to sort that stuff out, to kind of find out, what was the spirit and what wasn't. And, I'm sure that was controversial to someone, but it was what my experience with him was and the lessons from him. And so to me, that kind of explains that idea. It's also because anytime, it's not just Christians, though. It's not just any religion. All religions have people in them that believe they are the only way. You have the Hare Krishnas who will tell you that Ramakrishna is no good. You've got to have it's Krishna alone that will bring you to God. And what it is, it's fundamentalism. So it's not a matter of a religion, because there are also Christians that I've met that are very broad-minded. And they believe that love wins. That's their code word, that love wins, meaning is that God's going to get you there no matter what. So it's fundamentalism that causes that idea of exclusivity. And that fundamentalism comes when a person mixes their ego with their religion. And when you combine ego and religion, you get fundamentalism, and you get violence, and you get separation, and you get division, and you get all of that. And so as spiritual seekers, that's why this not tolerating egoism in ourselves, trying to transcend ourselves, trying to really be unselfish. Vivekananda says there's only 2 ways to know how spiritual you are. 2 questions to ask yourself. Number 1, am I unselfish? And number 2, am I loving? And to the degree that you can say yes to either of those questions, to that degree, you are progressing as a spiritual person in spiritual life. So that's the whole, that's everything in one package that I would say about that. But I certainly understand it. And like I said, the first time I read this book, and the first time, which was probably, I don't know, 20 something years ago, and the first time I read that story, it was at that point that I set the book down and didn't pick it up again for many years. And so, but that was unnecessary. It's for us to know the truth and then to read the truth, and where we see things that we disagree with, we just disagree with them and go on. There's no need to make issue of them necessarily.
Swamiji, may I say something?
Please.
Okay, when I first came to this country, that was the first time I realized that and I was in Wichita, Kansas then in 75 or 4, I don't remember. But anyway, that how many of the Christians that I met were like, that Jesus is the only savior, and they tried very hard for me to understand, to convert. And to me, it didn't matter, because I grew up that it doesn't matter what name form is, because even in India, within Hinduism, we have so many gods and goddesses, and it doesn't matter. So, but my question so it didn't matter what they said to me. I just went along, But today, I think that in the devout Christians, there are so many people who are so beautiful and really loving. At some point, do they ever think that all religions are same, or do they still continue? Like, how do they get to that oneness point without excluding other people of different religions? You know what I'm saying? Because I've met so many Christians who are just wonderful people.
Yes.
And I don't care whether they're Christian or what. So there must be something that must come to them when they reach that point, or at that point too, they.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of in a pickle in this conversation, because we're talking about an imagined group of people.
They're so helpful, so kind.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. There are those Christians who are absolutely that way. What I'm saying is, we can't talk about a block of people, like we can't say Christians and then come up with an explanation for why they think or do or how they become. But what I can say is that during my time up in Holy Cross, I became aware of many small movements within Catholicism and Anglicanism, which were very broadening. And also the Catholic Church has, back in what I think it was 67, they had a special conference, and in there, for the first time, acknowledged that truth existed in other religions. But unfortunately, they penned a single sentence at the end, simply saying that the power of salvation lies within the church. And so they gave the institution the power of salvation, which I was shocked to hear that. But I heard that from 2 theologians when I was actually giving a talk in the UK, and there were a couple of theologians in the audience, and we had a long conversation, a couple of hours of conversation around this idea. But and just before we started this class, Sarah was mentioning that book Universal Christ by Richard Rohr, who's a Franciscan monk in the Catholic Church, and he absolutely talks about this unity. He absolutely breaks the bounds of Christianity as being the only means of, in their language, salvation. So Jesus' last prayer on earth, which recorded in Matthew, his prayer is that we might, through love, be bound in oneness with him as he is with the Father. So this, you can't worship love in a tradition and not eventually have it bind you into a oneness, to have it open the heart. You kind of begin to realize this doesn't make sense, just either logically or spiritually, to make an absolute statement, of the one and only way. It's definitely a period that we all go through, in Bhakti Yoga. One of the first things that Vivekananda warns us about is this fundamentalism, this idea that in bhakta, in devotion, it's very tempting to think that your wife is the most beautiful wife in the world, and that no other wife can be as beautiful as your wife. And so it's a warning. Vivekananda says this is the one thing about bhakti that is a perilous danger, is this fanaticism, where you mistake the ideal, you mistake an avatar for a personality, you mistake an incarnation for a name and form, not realizing that the incarnation is like Thakur, like Ramakrishna describes, the incarnation is an absence. It's an absence of any selfishness, an absence of any particular identity. It's a whole. He likened it to being a whole through which God can be experienced, to which God can be seen. And so the fact that it's a warning in the Bhakti Sutras, going as far back almost as time probably, kind of brings us to the reality of the situation. Egoism is every person's problem. And for those in a given religion, and it's all religions have those people in them. There's no religion that's free of this particularism that says my religion is the only way, the fanaticism. And so when we see it, we just recognize it. We name it. Oh, there it is. One of the dangers of devotion, and they've fallen victim to it.
Also, this world is shrinking. People are mingling with different cultures and religions. For example, my daughter's husband's parents are very strict Christian missionaries.
Mm-hmm.
So when he first took her to meet them, the mother wasn't happy. And I don't know if she wanted her to switch to Christianity or not. But my daughter said that, life is too precious. I don't want to marry you if there's any conflict with your mom or father, because to me, I'm marrying the family, not just you.
Right.
I don't want to take it further. Then I guess the sister-in-law spoke and everything is fine. And, we've known them for 10, 12 years now. They come spend time with us. They're the nicest people. Now there's no conflict. Everybody can do what they want to.
Yes.
They just don't care if she doesn't practice. She doesn't care if they read the Bible to the children. She's happy. And I do my own mantras with them.
Yes.
So the kids just love it. So, right. I mean, now they have a better understanding that even if they don't want to practice or accept another religion, at least they accept us in terms that we're okay. Yes. We're spiritual too.
That's the nature of love.
Yeah, and they're the nicest people.
Yes. You see, and that's how we are to meet this battle, is with love. We don't get offended. We don't get self-righteous. We don't feel the need to change their opinion even.
No.
But if that's a harmless opinion for them, if it helps their devotion and they're growing stronger in their love of God, and it's ultimately going to lead them to being more loving as people, fine. Let God go on with them as she feels she needs to. And it's not just between religions. My mother was Lutheran and my father was Church of Christ, and his parents, who were preachers, my grandfather was a minister, that they demanded that my mother convert to Church of Christ before they allowed my father to marry her. So it's not Christians against other religions. It's even Christians against different types of Christians. So this is just the problem with egoism. Egoism always divides. Egoism always builds up the individual at the expense of the whole. And that's why it's so destructive. And that's why it lies at the very center of our challenge in spiritual life, to eliminate selfishness, to eliminate the idea of ourself as a body, mind, particular, and to understand our universal nature, that it is the image of God, which is one, and which energizes every single one of us, which lives through every single one of us. And that's our practice, is to see the image of God in each other, to recognize the beloved in each other. And that's where unity comes from. It will not be able to ever come from any other source.
And I forgot to tell, sorry, go ahead.
No, please, go ahead.
When my daughter and son-in-law got married, which was shortly after she met them, They wore Indian clothes because they were missionaries most of the time in Africa. That's where they lived. And then he was actually from Michigan, but they lived all their life in Africa. So there are lots of Indians in Africa too. So they had seen all those outfits. And so when we went to India to do the shopping, they sent their measurements and we got clothes for everybody. And they sat in the Indian wedding mandap, you know, the thing we have where you have the wedding ceremony.
Uh-huh.
And we told the father-in-law that after the ceremony, he can say whatever he wants about Christianity or the wedding or whatever. And he sure enough said whatever he wanted to, and everybody was happy. We didn't care that, okay, in the Hindu ceremony, he cannot talk about Christianity or whatever he wanted to.
Yeah.
To this day, I regret that I told them you can't kiss each other when the gods are present after the wedding. I mean, what would it wouldn't have mattered, but then I just thought it was inappropriate.
Yeah, sure. No, see that happens, and you know, my experience at Holy Cross was that way too. I went there in Garawa dressed as a Vedantist monk, and I went and I asked them if I could come and stay with them to study with them for a while because I was studying this idea of Vedic Christianity, and I was at the time trying to come up with the means of teaching the Vedanta through Christian scripture only, and so I wanted to stay up there and work with them on that project. And one of the first monks that I met was Brother Lawrence, believe it or not, Brother Lawrence, and he was this old monk, and he was out in the garden, and my host took me out to meet him. So I went out, and I was there in my Garawa, and he was there in his, well, actually street clothes because they don't wear their robes except in church. But he introduced me as Swami Chid Brahmananda, and he introduced him to me as Brother Lawrence, and we shook hands. And Brother Lawrence, I remember, kind of straightened himself up, and he kind of brought his eyes together like that and looked at me up and down. And he said to me, a monk is a monk. And when I stayed there for that 10 months, even though they had, you know, 100-room guest house, they put me in the monastery with them in the cloister, and I was invited. I was treated exactly like all of the rest of their monks. I came and I sat in the brothers' circle every morning. I did their prayers with them. I sat in the monks' pews up on the altar when we did the chanting of the offices. In no way did they separate me out, and they let me give some classes to the brothers there on Vedanta, so that they could understand where I was coming from and what I was doing. So yes, it is the way that all things are moving, and probably not entirely, but at least partially to the reason that you mentioned. The world is getting smaller. It's not so easy that you're to believe that you're the only ones anymore, because now you're seeing this evidence. I mean, you wouldn't believe when I first started studying the Vedanta, I was so surprised. I was like, I didn't have any idea that religion was so beautiful. You know, I had no notion. I had read nothing else. I had read only the Bible for 27 years of my life. I read no other book but the Bible. That was my commitment, you know. And life itself has taught me differently, has opened my heart and opened my mind. And this day where I stand now, I can easily, honestly, and full-heartedly say that religion is one, though the sages have called it by many names, you know. And so the thing that really helped also was my realization. I was like, you know, Ramakrishna has not asked me to do a single thing that Jesus wouldn't approve of. So yes. All right. Well, we've come to 8:02. And we've already having questions and conversations. So let me stop the recording.